The Kelowna Glaciers practice facility smelled like cold rubber, coffee, and the particular brand of competitive misery that professional hockey players wore the way other men wore cologne. Nora Callahan had been standing at the edge of Rink 2 for 11 minutes, watching a left-winger do something physiologically impossible. Dax Mercer was skating backward at full speed, stick-handling a puck around two defenders simultaneously, while maintaining eye contact with her across 90 feet of ice. Not arrogant eye contact. Something else. Something that made Nora's clipboard feel suddenly important in her hands. She looked down at her notes. Pre-season musculoskeletal assessments. 12 players to evaluate today, 2 of whom had flagged hamstring concerns from camp. She was not here to watch left-wingers show off. She was here to do her job. "You're the new trainer," said a voice beside her. Roman Voss had appeared without sound, without warning, and now stood at her shoulder like weather rolling in. 6'2", jaw cut from something geological, dark hair damp from an earlier skate. The C stitched to his chest looked like it had been branded there at birth. "Callahan," she said. "And yes, I know who you are." He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at Dax. Don't let him charm his way out of the protocol assessment. He's done it to every trainer we've had. How many have you had? A pause that lasted just one beat too long. 4 in 3 years. Nora made a note that had nothing to do with hamstrings. The protocol assessment for Dax Mercer was scheduled for 4 o'clock. He arrived at 4:07, hair still wet from a shower, smelling faintly of pine and something wild that she mentally filed under expensive body wash and then immediately unfiled because that was unprofessional. "Callahan," he said, reading her ID badge. "Irish. Sit on the table." He sat. She noticed with the clinical detachment she'd spent 3 years developing, in extraordinary physical condition. Not the manufactured bulk of a gym obsessive, something leaner, more functional. The kind of muscle that existed to run, to pivot, to absorb impact and give it back. His right shoulder showed a surgical scar she didn't recognize from his file. "That's not in your records," she said, pressing 2 fingers to it, the faintest flinch. "Old injury. From?" He met her eyes then. His were a shade of green she didn't have a name for, not emerald, not sage, something between the two, something that lived in forest light. For 1/2 second she had the irrational sense that she'd seen them before, in a different context, in something more primal and less fluorescent lit. "Car accident," he said. "I was 17. She wrote it down. She didn't believe him. She wrote that down too in her private shorthand. "You heal fast," she said. It wasn't a compliment. It was a question about wearing complimentary clothes. Dax Mercer smiled at her. And it was the kind of smile that arrived without warning and left damage behind. "I've been lucky," he said. After he left, Nora sat in the empty treatment room for a long time, reading the same line in her notes over and over. Right shoulder. Scar tissue, origin unclear. Surrounding musculature, anomalous density. Range of motion, exceeds normal parameters by approximate 40%. She had worked with NHL players, Olympic athletes, one former professional gymnast. She had never seen a shoulder move like that. She had also never seen a scar that looked like 4 parallel lines, each perfectly spaced, each the exact width of a finger. The kind of lines a hand might make. If the hand were very large. If the fingers ended in something other than nails. She closed her folder and decided she needed more coffee. Roman Voss had been controlling it for 11 years. That was how he thought of it. Not himself, not the wolf, not any of the dramatic terminology that younger, less disciplined members of his kind preferred. He called it because naming something gave it personality, and he had long since refused to do that. It was a condition, a physiological reality. A thing he managed the way other men managed chronic pain or anxiety or the particular loneliness of captaincy. He ran 6 miles every morning at 5 a.m., before any of the other players were awake. He ate carefully, trained obsessively, and slept exactly 7 hours a night, no more, no less. More sleep meant dreaming, and dreaming meant losing whatever fine discipline he'd assembled over a decade of very deliberate living. He did not date. He did not drink. He did not form attachments easily because attachments were exposure, and exposure was the one thing he couldn't afford. Dax was the problem. Dax had always been the problem, not maliciously, never maliciously, which was in some ways worse. The younger man was everything Roman had trained himself not to be. Reckless with his gifts, casual about concealment, careless in the way that only the very good-looking and very talented could afford to be careless. He healed too fast in front of the wrong people. His eyes caught the light wrong in team photographs. He once, God help them both, grew canines on the team bus because a song came on the radio that he apparently associated with a full moon in a field somewhere, and he lost the plot for 45 seconds before Roman's hand found the back of his neck and squeezed with enough force to refocus him. "You can't keep doing this," Roman had said. In the quiet bathroom of a Marriott in Winnipeg, both of them staring at their reflections. Dax's eyes still glowing, just slightly, like embers not quite out. "I'm fine," Dax had said. "You're a liability. You're my captain, not my keeper." "I am exactly your keeper," Roman had said. "That's the arrangement. That's always been the arrangement. You play, you keep it together, I watch your back. You break the arrangement, I can't help you." Dax had looked at him in the mirror for a long time. Then he'd smiled, that infuriating, disarming, catastrophically effective smile, and said, "Good thing you like me, then." Roman had liked him against every instinct. Since the night 7 years ago when he'd found a 22-year-old Dax Mercer shivering in the parking lot of a rink in Penticton, 3 weeks turned and completely unmoored, having been bitten in a field outside Revelstoke by something that hadn't waited around for introductions. Roman had driven him into the mountains, sat with him through 2 nights of the worst of it, and then spent the better part of a year teaching him what Roman himself had learned by brutal trial: how to exist in the world without the world knowing what you were. He had not expected to feel responsible for him. He had not expected to feel anything for a long time, actually. Then Nora Callahan arrived, with her clipboard and her careful eyes and her habit of noticing exactly the things you needed her not to notice, and Roman felt something he hadn't in years. A clean, clear, uncomplicated pulse of recognition. Not the wolf's recognition, which was, he understood with the grim clarity of a man who had made a study of his own worst impulses, considerably more dangerous. The Glaciers opened the season with 3 wins in 4 games, and Nora found herself in an unusual situation. She was good at her job, her players trusted her, and 2 of them were making it extremely difficult to maintain professional detachment. It wasn't a romantic problem initially, it was a scientific one. Dax Mercer took a slap shot to the ribs in Game 2. She'd heard the crack from the bench, a sound that meant cracked or broken, a sound that meant weeks off the ice, and was back on his feet in 30 seconds, laughing. When she examined him in the locker room afterward, the bruising was already fading. Not faded, fading. In real time while she watched. She documented it. She photographed it. She said nothing, because she was constitutionally averse to saying things she couldn't explain. Roman Voss, meanwhile, was a different kind of problem. He was relentlessly present. In the training room before practice, asking methodical questions about the team's conditioning protocols with the attentiveness of a man who genuinely cared whether the answers were good. In the hallway after games, checking on injured players with a quiet authority that had nothing to do with his title. Once, at 11 at night when she was still filing reports, a knock at her office door, and him standing there with 2 cups of coffee from the place 3 blocks away that she hadn't mentioned liking but that he had apparently noticed she ordered every morning. "You don't have to," she started. "I was walking past," he said, which was obviously a lie, since the coffee shop was not on the way to anything from the arena. She took the coffee. He stayed for an hour. They talked about nothing and everything: training philosophy, the team's defensive gaps, the particular misery of away games in Eastern time zones. He did not flirt. He did not push. He was simply, utterly, devastatingly present in a way that men who wanted something usually weren't, because wanting usually made people reach forward, and Roman Voss just settled into the space beside her like he belonged there and waited to see what happened next. She found herself at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling of her apartment, reconstructing the lines of his face from memory with a precision she didn't know she possessed. The jaw, the dark eyes that caught light like still water, the way his whole body went quiet when he was thinking. She cataloged it the way she cataloged physical data, clinically, methodically, and absolutely failed to convince herself it was clinical. And then there was Dax, who was a completely different problem in completely different packaging. Dax, who caught her in the hallway after practice one Thursday and walked beside her without being invited and said, "You've been running your own tests on me." She stopped walking. "I run tests on all the players. Not like these." He wasn't smiling. His voice was quiet in a way that suggested seriousness lived somewhere under all that easy charisma. "The tissue density studies. The blood work you reordered. You found something." "I found anomalies I can't explain," she said carefully, which is a medical notation, not an accusation. He was quiet for a moment, studying her with those unsettling green eyes. "What would you do?" he said. "If you found out something about one of the players that you couldn't explain, something that didn't fit into any protocol." "My job is to keep players healthy and on the ice," Nora said. "Not to create problems." Something shifted in his expression, relief or something close to it. "You're different from the others," he said. "What others?" But he'd already started walking again, hands in his pockets, shoulders loose, radiating that easy warmth that she was beginning to understand was armor as much as personality. "The other trainers," he said over his shoulder. "They never lasted this long." She stood in the hallway for a while after he was gone, turning that conversation over in her hands like a puzzle box. The first full moon of the season fell on a home game night in late October, which Roman had flagged months ago in his personal calendar with the notation managed carefully. He'd spoken to Dax 3 days prior, walked through the protocol, controlled exposure, early exit from the post-game environment, the mountain cabin 30 kilometers outside the city that Roman kept specifically for these occasions. What he had not planned for was Nora working late. The arena cleared out around midnight. Roman had already handled his media obligations, sent the last of the support staff home, and was doing a final sweep of the facility when he heard it. 2 voices in the lower corridor near the ice maintenance equipment. One was Dax's. The other was Nora's. He didn't run. Running would mean something he wasn't ready to name. He walked quickly, which was almost the same thing, and arrived at the corridor to find Dax sitting on the floor against the wall, head in his hands, and Nora crouched in front of him with the particular controlled calm of someone choosing not to panic in a situation that warranted it. "Just stay with me, okay? I need you to breathe," she was saying. Her voice was low and steady, the voice of a woman who had made a habit of being the most composed person in a room. Dax's hands were shaking. His jaw was tight with the visible effort of something. Roman knew exactly what, and his eyes, when they flickered up, caught the corridor light in a way that was not entirely human. "Roman." Nora looked up and saw him, and her face didn't do what most people's faces did, which was panic or relief or some combination. It did something stranger. It went still the way it did when she was processing data. He collapsed coming off the ice. "I don't know what's happening." Roman crossed to them in 4 steps, knelt beside Dax, and put a hand on the back of his neck. The contact was deliberate, an old, learned gesture, an anchor. He felt the shudder that ran through Dax's frame, felt the tension wound to breaking point, felt him slowly start to come back from whatever edge he'd been standing on. "We need to get him outside," Roman said to Nora. "He needs medical." "He needs outside," Roman said, and something in his voice must have carried the particular weight of someone who had been through this before, because Nora stood up without further argument and helped him get Dax to his feet. They got him to the parking lot, then to the tree line beyond it, the small copse of pines at the arena's northern edge that Roman had, not coincidentally, once mentioned to the grounds crew should be left unlit for the sake of the local bird population. Under the trees, in the October cold, with the full moon overhead and open space around him. Dax let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for hours. Nora watched all of this. She watched Dax's hands stop shaking. She watched the color come back into his face in a way that wasn't quite normal. She watched Roman standing 3 feet away with his arms crossed and his expression the controlled blankness of a man who was feeling a great deal and showing none of it. She looked at the moon. She looked at Dax. She was a woman of science. She had a master's degree in sports medicine and a professional history that prided itself on evidence-based conclusions. She had, over the last 6 weeks, accumulated a file of anomalies that she'd been deferring explanations for, and standing in a pine grove at midnight in the cold white moonlight, every deferred explanation arrived at once. "Oh," said Nora Callahan very quietly. Both men looked at her. "You should have told me," she said to Roman. He said nothing. His jaw was tight. "You," she started and then stopped herself, because she was a professional and she needed a moment to sort this into something workable. She took the moment. She sorted. He could have had a medical episode one wasn't prepared for. That's a liability. That's a safety issue. That's not about what you are, that's about what I am, which is the person responsible for keeping your team in one piece. Her voice was steady. It cost her something to keep it steady, and she paid that cost without showing the receipt. Roman opened his mouth. Closed it. I opened it again. "She's not wrong," Dax said, from the ground where he'd sat down again, back against a pine trunk, moonlight turning his hair silver gold. He sounded better. He sounded, in fact, remarkable. "She's been covering for me for weeks without knowing why. That's not fair." "It puts her at risk," Roman said. "She's already at risk," Dax said. "She's been asking the right questions for 6 weeks. You think she doesn't already know?" Another silence. Above them, the moon was merciless in its clarity. "I know enough," Nora said. "I know I need to know the rest." Roman looked at her for a long time. His dark eyes were the most unreadable thing she'd ever tried to read, and she had spent her professional life reading bodies. "Tomorrow," he said. "Not here." "Tomorrow," she agreed. She looked at Dax one more time, sitting in the moonlight with that easy, irreverent grace that she was only now understanding was something more than personality. He was looking up at the sky with an expression she'd never seen on him before. Peaceful, stripped of the performance, completely and utterly himself. He was beautiful, in a way that made her chest do something inconvenient. She walked back to the arena without looking at either of them again because she needed to think, and she could not think when she was looking at them. Roman's cabin was 2 hours from the city, up a logging road that wasn't on any map he hadn't personally removed from cartographic services via a series of calls that had cost him, as his accountant regularly noted, more money than was rational for a man who claimed to merely enjoy hiking. He took her there on a Saturday in November, when the first snow had come down from the peaks and the pines were heavy with it. He drove the way he did everything, precisely, without excess movement, with a silence that was not uncomfortable but was also not performing comfort. Nora asked her questions in the car. He answered them. All of them. Took 90 minutes. By the time they reached the cabin, she knew the following things. Werewolves were real. There were roughly 40 that he was aware of in the BC interior alone. The condition was contagious only under specific and uncommon circumstances, their community. She noted his slight wince at the word, had a loose network of individuals who monitored and assisted newly turned wolves, and Roman Voss had been one of them for 11 years and a hockey player for 13. "Which came first?" she asked, stepping out of the truck into the cold mountain air. "Hockey," he said. "I was bitten in my second year in the AHL. I am 20 years old. A man I thought was a scout. He wasn't. What happened to him?" The silence that followed was its own answer. The cabin was clean and sparse in a way that suggested both taste and purpose. A man who spent time in a place because he needed it, not because he was decorating a life. There was a kitchen, a main room with a wide hearth, and windows that looked out over the valley with a view that would have cost millions at lower elevations. Nora stood at the window for a long time. "Why me?" she asked. "You've had 4 trainers. You kept it from all of them. Why tell me?" "I didn't tell you," Roman said. "You found out." "That's not an answer." He was quiet. Then, "Because the others left when they got close to it. They didn't want to know. You—" He paused. And she heard in that pause the particular difficulty of a very private man being precise about something he'd rather not be precise about. "You got close and stayed. That changes the calculus." "The calculus," she repeated, "of what's safe to tell you." She turned away from the window. He was standing by the hearth, arms crossed, and for a moment she saw him with a clarity she hadn't had access to before. Not the captain, not the controlled professional, but the man under all of it. The one who ran 6 miles at 5 a.m. to wear himself down. The one who had spent 11 years managing something enormous entirely alone. With the exception of a reckless, charming young wolf he'd taken under his protection because the alternative was unthinkable. "Dax trusts you completely," she said. "Whatever you two are to each other." "We're packed," he said simply. "It's not complicated. It's actually the least complicated relationship I have." There it was again, that thing in his voice when something almost escaped the enclosure. She filed it. "What's the most complicated?" The fire crackled. The snow came down outside in the quiet way mountain snow did. Without drama, without announcement. "I'm working on that," Roman said. And because Nora Callahan was a woman who understood that some answers were not yet ready to be given, she let it sit, and they had coffee in the cabin at the edge of the world while the mountains held their silence around them. She did not mean for it to happen with Dax first. She did not, in fact, mean for anything to happen with anyone. She had come to Kelowna to work, not to complicate her life, and she had a reasonably good track record of keeping those 2 categories separate. It happened after a road trip to Edmonton in January, in a hotel hallway at 1 in the morning, after a game they'd won in overtime on an assist by Dax that had been so deft and precise that the arena had gone quiet for a half-second before erupting, the crowd needing a moment to understand what they'd just seen. She'd been heading to her room. He'd been coming from the elevator, still carrying the electric charge that he always had after games. Amplified, she now understood, by something that was not adrenaline but rhymed with it. "You've been quiet since the cabin," he said, without preamble. "I've been processing. It's been 6 weeks. I process slowly." He laughed, and it was quiet and genuine, the real laugh, not the performed one. "No, you don't. You're the fastest thinker I've ever met." He fell into step beside her, hands in his jacket pockets. "What are you actually doing?" She stopped at her door. "Being careful," she said. "About." The hallway was empty. The hotel hummed its particular nighttime hum. She looked at him standing there, easy, open, those green eyes warm and direct, and thought about all the things she'd catalogued over 4 months. The joy he found in the ice. The loyalty he had for Roman ran deeper than friendship. The way he sometimes looked at her like she was a problem he was very much enjoying trying to solve. "About the fact that I work for this team," she said. "About the fact that my job requires me to be objective. And you make objectivity very difficult." The smile came slowly this time. "Is that a complaint?" "It's a statement of fact." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and his hand was warm, absurdly warm, and she thought with the part of her brain that would not stop running assessments that his resting body temperature ran approximately 2 degrees higher than normal, which she had documented, and which now felt beside the point. "Nora," he said. Just her name, just like that. She kissed him first. She'd tell herself otherwise later, but she was constitutionally honest, and she had kissed him first. It was not a small, tentative thing. It was the kind of kiss that happened when 2 people had been not kissing for months and the restraint had built up enough structural pressure to collapse a building. When she pulled back, they were both slightly breathless, and Dax's eyes were the color of new leaves after rain, and she thought, "I have made this considerably more complicated." "Roman," she said. His expression changed. Not much, he was good at not much, but enough. I know, he said quietly. I'm not, she started. I don't know what I am. I know that too. He stepped back, giving her space, giving her room to breathe. He's Roman. He's... A pause, searching for words that were adequate. He's the gravity in the room. He's always been that. And you? Dax smiled, and it had something sad in it now, something she hadn't seen there before. I'm the light, he said. But light without gravity just goes everywhere. She went into her room and sat on the edge of her bed and thought about the implications of caring for two people simultaneously, which she had never done before and which she was unprepared for in ways that her considerable competence did not help with. She was also, she noticed, not guilty, which was its own data point. Roman knew. Of course he knew. He had instincts that were quite literally supernatural, and beyond that, he had spent the better part of his life watching people with the attentiveness of someone who couldn't afford to miss anything. He knew the night it happened, from the quiet in Dax's body language the next morning, from the particular way Nora said good morning to both of them with exactly the same intonation, which was a tell she probably didn't know she was giving. What surprised him was what he felt about it. Not jealousy, or not only jealousy. Underneath that was something worse, something more complicated. Recognition. The feeling of having arrived at a door he'd been circling for months and finding it had been opened from the other side. He did not confront Dax. He did not confront Nora. He went to practice and he ran his drills and he played his game, and he spent the next 2 weeks performing normality with the same focused discipline he brought to everything, which worked mostly except for the part where he was alone in his apartment at midnight reviewing game tape and kept finding his eyes going to the section of the bench where she sat during games, her head bent over her tablet, her hair swept back, her attention complete and uncompromising in a way that made the rest of the arena slightly less real. Dax found him on a Wednesday, in the weight room at 7 in the morning when the facility was otherwise empty. Say something, Dax said, dropping onto the bench across from him. I'm saying nothing, Roman said. That's the problem. How is that a problem? Because you're doing the thing. Dax mimicked his posture. Arms crossed, face sealed. The Roman thing, where you're deciding to sacrifice something because you've decided it's better for everyone else. It would be better for everyone else. You don't know that. She's already with you. She's not with me, Dax said, his voice careful. We haven't, it wasn't a declaration. She doesn't know what she's doing yet. She's figuring it out. And you leaving the picture entirely doesn't give her a fair choice. Roman said nothing for a long time. The weight room hummed. Outside the windows, January sat on the city like something permanent. What do you want from me, Dax? I want you to talk to her. He leaned forward. Roman, I have known you for 7 years. I have watched you be the most controlled, most disciplined, most annoyingly consistent person I have ever encountered. And I have watched you, for the last 4 months, lose your grip on that every time she walks into the room. Not because she's dangerous to us. She's the first person who actually made us safer. But because she's her. He paused. Just talk to her. Roman looked at his hands. The hands that had steadied Dax through his worst nights, that had held the line for 11 years, that had spent so long managing that they'd almost forgotten what reaching felt like. And if she chooses, he said, one or the other, when she has to choose. Dax was quiet for a moment. Then she chooses, he said simply. But at least she gets to. He came to her office on a Friday in February, after practice, when the building was emptying out and the particular quiet of a facility at rest settled into the hallways like snow. He didn't bring coffee this time. He sat down across from her desk in the chair that he'd used a dozen times before, and she closed her laptop, and they looked at each other for a moment with all the accumulated weight of 5 months between them. Dax told you to come, she said. Yes. You wouldn't have otherwise. Probably not. Why? He was quiet long enough that she thought he might not answer. Then, because I've spent 11 years not wanting things I can't have. I'm good at it. It's the skill I've most developed. He looked at the window. You're not a thing. You're a person. But the habit is the same. Why can't you have? She started and then stopped, because she didn't know how to finish that sentence without saying something irreversible. It's not about what I am, he said quietly, reading it correctly. I know Dax thinks that's the block. It's not. I've known humans who've built lives with people like me. It's possible. He looked at her. It's the exposure. Anyone I let in becomes a risk. Not just to me, to Dax, to everyone I'm responsible for. And I've been responsible for a long time. I've been inside the circle for months, Nora said. I already know everything. That's not the risk. Then what is? Something moved across his face. Not the controlled blankness, not the captain's mask, but something underneath both of those, something raw and precisely felt. You, he said, you're the risk, caring about you specifically, because if something happened, he stopped, started again. I am very practiced at protecting things. I am not practiced at being protected. And you are, another stop. You are the kind of person who would try. The fluorescent light hummed. Outside, the last cars were leaving the lot. Nora stood up and walked around her desk, and she took his face in both hands the way she took injured joints. Carefully, purposefully, with the full intention of understanding what was there, and she looked at him for a long time. Roman, she said, I treat hockey players for a living. I am constitutionally incapable of not trying. The sound he made was almost a laugh, almost something else. He put his hands over hers, large and warm and very carefully gentle. I know, he said. That's the problem. It's not a problem. Nora, it's not a problem, she said again, and kissed him, slow and sure, the way she did everything, intentionally, without apology. He kissed her back with the pent force of a man who had been holding something for a very long time, and she discovered that underneath the discipline and the control and the 11 years of careful management, Roman Voss was an earthquake. She had 2 weeks of something she didn't have a name for, not a triangle because triangles implied geometry, and this had no clean angles before the thing she hadn't planned for arrived. His name was Gideon Vance, and he arrived in Kelowna on a Tuesday wearing a journalist's lanyard and a smile that didn't fit his face correctly. Nora noticed him first because he was watching Dax during the media availability with the particular attention of someone who had a hypothesis they were testing, not a story they were chasing. She noticed him second because when Roman's name came up in a question and the scrum turned toward the captain, Gideon Vance went still the way prey animals went still. Absolutely, comprehensively, and with the underlying current of something calculating. She mentioned it to Roman that night. He was quiet for a long time. What did he look like? Roman asked. She described him. Roman went very still in the way that she'd learned to read. Not calm, but contained. The earthquake behind glass. I need you and Dax to stay in the arena tomorrow, he said. Don't leave separately. Don't go anywhere alone. Roman, please. The word cost him something. She could hear it. She agreed. What she learned, in pieces over the following days, was this: Gideon Vance was not a journalist. He was something older than that, a hunter, and not metaphorically, affiliated with a network that had been tracking known members of Roman's community for the better part of a decade. He had followed a trail from Vancouver, where a young wolf had been carelessly visible, to Kelowna, where the trail got very warm very quickly. He was also, Margot Renner told her quietly on a Thursday in the medical office, not entirely human himself, which changed the nature of the threat in ways that took Nora several minutes to recalibrate around. What is he? Nora asked. Old, Margot said simply. Old and wronged once, and some wrongings don't heal correctly. The hunt began not with violence, not yet, but with precision. A rumor placed in the right ear. A photograph taken at the wrong angle. 2 players' contracts flagged to league medical oversight with an anonymous complaint about undisclosed medical conditions. The kind of pressure that didn't leave bruises. Dax took it with white-knuckled humor. Roman took it with the controlled rage of someone who had learned very well how to weaponize discipline. Nora took her recorder, her files, and everything she documented over 5 months and began to build a counter-narrative with the same methodical precision she brought to injury management. Find the weakness in the structure, address it before it became catastrophic. "What are you doing?" Roman asked, coming into her office at midnight to find her surrounded by paperwork. "Protecting my players," she said. "Which is my job." "Nora, this isn't. Do you trust me?" A pause. Then simply, "Yes." "Then let me work." He stayed. He brought coffee. He did not interfere, which was the most difficult thing she had ever watched anyone do. It came on a game night in March, under a full moon that none of them had wanted and the schedule had not cared about. The Glaciers were up 2-1 in the third period when Dax took a hit from behind. Dirty, targeted, the kind of hit that ended careers, and went down hard into the boards. Nora was on the ice before the whistle had fully blown. The way she always was, running her assessment with her hands while the referee sorted the aftermath. She knew immediately that he wasn't badly hurt. She also knew that the hit had shaken something loose. His eyes, when she looked into them, were not the right color. "Dax," she said quietly, in the specific tone she developed over months. "Look at me. Stay with me." He was looking at the player who'd hit him. Still on the ice, receiving his penalty, mouth running with the kind of trash talk that players used to get under each other's skin. And there was something in Dax's face that was very old and very singular and had absolutely nothing to do with hockey. "Dax." Her hand on his jaw, turning him toward her. "You're on the ice. You're in the game. That's where you are." The trembling was in his hands now, and she covered them with hers without thinking about it, without calculation, just the instinct of someone who had been doing this for months. "You are here, I am here, stay." He stayed. She got him to the bench with enough composure intact that the broadcast cameras caught nothing unusual, and she sat beside him and kept her hand on his wrist. Pulse check, she'd call it if anyone asked, while Roman on the ice played the next 6 minutes of the best hockey she'd ever seen him play, which she suspected had something to do with knowing Dax was safe and everything to do with the particular ferocity of a person defending what they love. Gideon Vance was waiting in the parking structure after the game. He was alone. He had, she realized as they came out into the echoing concrete dark, been watching her specifically. "The trainer," he said. "The one who knows." "The journalist," she said. "The one who isn't." He smiled. It still didn't fit his face correctly. "They told you. I work things out on my own." "Then you understand why this can't continue," he said. "These men playing at being human. The access you have. The information. How long before someone less reasonable than me comes looking?" "I think," said Nora carefully, "that the most effective way to prevent someone dangerous from finding them is to ensure there's nothing findable." She held up the folder. "I have 5 months of medical records. Complete, documented, and completely explainable within standard physiological variants." She had spent the last 2 weeks doing exactly this, not destroying information but recontextualizing it, building a medical narrative that was true in every way except the one that would get people killed. Anomalous density, unusual recovery rates, genetic outliers. Nothing here that any reasonable league medical official would flag. A silence. He studied her with those ancient, ill-fitting eyes. "You'd protect them," he said. "Humans don't usually." "They're my players," she said. "And I'm very good at my job." Roman and Dax had come up behind her. She heard them without turning. She'd know those footsteps anywhere by now. She kept her eyes on Vance. "It's over," she said. "Whatever you think you came here to do, it's done. There's nothing to find." Gideon Vance looked at the 3 of them for a long time, the woman with her folder and her clinical certainty, the young wolf at her left, the old wolf at her right. Something moved across his face that might have been, impossibly, respect. "You're more than they deserve," he said. "They're exactly what I deserve," she said, which was not an argument she'd planned, but which arrived with the force of something she'd been assembling for months without knowing it. He left. He didn't come back. The parking structure held its concrete silence. Above the open level, somewhere beyond the city's glow, the full moon was doing what it always did. Burning white and indifferent and entirely beautiful. Dax exhaled beside her. "Nora, don't," she said. "I'm going to need a minute." She took the minute. She stood in the cold concrete dark and breathed and let the adrenaline complete its circuit. Roman's hand found the small of her back. Just that, just his hand, steady and warm and saying nothing that needed saying. "Okay," she said when the minute was up. "Okay," Roman said. They walked out into the March night together. 3 weeks after Vance left, Margot Renner asked to see her. Nora had always found the team physician slightly unnerving in ways she couldn't articulate. A watchfulness, a reserve, an apparent immunity to surprise that spoke of someone who had already arranged their expectations to account for the unusual. She attributed it to professional experience. She would later acknowledge, being obtuse. Margot closed the door of her office and poured 2 glasses of the thing in her flask. And this time Nora noticed it wasn't whiskey. It was something older and earthier, something that smelled like a forest at night. She drank it anyway, because her sense of self-preservation had apparently recalibrated significantly over the winter. "You've been having headaches," Margot said. It wasn't a question. Nora paused. "Tension, headaches. Work stress. You've been running warmer than usual." She thought about it. She had been warm. She'd blamed the building's heating. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Margot said carefully, "that the bite you sustained on the 14th of March, when Dax's control slipped on the ice and caught your wrist, which you documented as a minor abrasion and treated yourself without reporting." The room went very quiet. Nora looked at her wrist. The mark was almost healed. She'd barely noticed it. She noticed everything, and she had barely noticed this, which was itself a data point she should have registered immediately, except that she'd been busy. She'd been managing. "Oh," said Nora Callahan. For the second time in 6 months. Margot watched her with something that was almost compassion. "It's early," she said. "Early enough that it's not irreversible if that's your choice. There are options. There are always options. Does Roman know?" "He has no idea. His instincts are extraordinary, but they're not looking for it in you. You're familiar to him, which makes you harder to read." A pause. "Does Dax know?" "He knew before I did, didn't he?" It wasn't a question. She was assembling it even as she said it, the way Dax had been watching her lately, with something anxious behind the eyes, something wanting to say something and not finding the words. "He was waiting for you to come to him," Margot said. "He thought it should be your revelation." Nora sat with it for a long time. The headaches, the warmth, the extraordinary precision with which she'd been reading the room lately. Not just professionally, but personally, catching micro-expressions, anticipating movements, noticing things she hadn't noticed before at distances she shouldn't be able to read. She thought about the mountain cabin and the moonlight and what she'd felt standing in the pine grove that first night. Not just observation, but something deeper, some cellular resonance she'd attributed to adrenaline and proximity and the general surreal quality of the evening. She thought about how, since then, she'd never once felt unsafe in the presence of either of them. Not careful, not cautious, safe, like standing inside something larger than herself and finding it a good fit. "What does it mean?" she asked. "For what I am, for what I can do, for—" She gestured vaguely toward the door, toward the team, toward everything. "It means," Margot said, "that you were already inside the circle. You're just inside it differently now. And she stopped. "If I want to understand it first, before I decide, then you should talk to Roman," Margot said. "And Dax." The physician's eyes were steady and kind and very old. "They've been waiting for you to find this door for a while. They just didn't know how to point you toward it without taking the finding away from you." Nora stood up. She walked out of Margot's office and down the corridor and into the afternoon practice, where the team was running drills, where the ice was bright and loud and alive, and she stood at the boards for a moment looking at the two of them. Dax cutting across the crease with that impossible grace, Roman at the blue line calling adjustments with the authority of a man who had built a world here and defended it, and she felt something she recognized now for what it was. Not fear, not confusion, not even the particular bewilderment of having your reality fundamentally restructured. Choice, clean and clear and entirely hers. Roman looked up from the blue line and found her immediately, the way he always did, with that uncanny attention, and something in his face shifted when he saw her expression. He skated toward the board slowly, like a man trying not to startle something precious. "Nora, I need to talk to both of you," she said. "Tonight, not here." He read it. She watched him read it, the pieces assembling behind his dark eyes, arriving at the understanding, and then the understanding met something else. A relief so profound and so carefully unexpressed that she felt it like a shift in pressure, like the mountain air on the drive up to the cabin. "Tonight," he said. On the ice, Dax had stopped. He was looking at her from 30 feet away with the expression of someone trying very hard not to feel hope before he was certain he had permission to. She met his eyes. She nodded just slightly. The hope happened anyway. It was the kind that didn't wait for permission, bright and green and entirely his, radiating off him in the arena light like something luminous. She thought, "I am not afraid of this." She thought, "I am actually improbably entirely ready." The cabin in April was different from the cabin in November. The snow had receded up the mountains, the pines were releasing their winter smell, resin and melt and the green particular to things that had survived something, and the valley below was alive with the particular aliveness of a place that had been cold for a long time and was no longer. They sat on the porch, the three of them, with the last of the evening light gone and the first stars arriving, and Nora told them what she knew. Dax listened with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped, and that quality he had, when something mattered, of being absolutely still. Roman listened the way he always listened, completely, precisely, with every part of himself present in a way that most people never were. When she finished, there was a silence that held all three of them. "You could reverse it," Roman said. His voice was careful, neutral, offering her the door without pushing her through it. "Margot is right. It's early enough." "I know," Nora said. "You'd be protected either way," Dax said. "That's not. We're not saying you have to." "I know that too," she said. Another silence. The first stars were fully out now, and the moon, for days from full, was rising over the eastern ridge with its particular ancient self-possession. "I've been taking care of athletes for 8 years," Nora said. "I have dedicated a significant portion of my professional life to helping people understand their bodies and what those bodies can do. I find that," a pause, assembling, "I find that I am not afraid of having a body that can do more. I find that I am, in fact, curious." Dax made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else. "I also find," she continued, "that the two people who would walk me through it are the two people I would choose to walk through anything with, which makes this considerably simpler than it might otherwise be." Roman set down his coffee. He reached across and took her hand, and his grip was warm and careful and entirely certain. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Dax was quiet for a moment. Then he said very quietly, with all the performance stripped away and just the truth of him underneath, "We've been waiting for you for a long time. I don't mean," he shook his head, "I don't mean in the destiny sense. I mean in the sense of not knowing something was missing and then finding out it was you." Nora looked at him. She looked at Roman. She thought about the parking structure and the pine grove and the hotel hallway and every office coffee at midnight and every careful question and every moment of restraint and revelation and trust that had been built between the three of them over the course of a winter. She thought about the moon, which asked nothing and illuminated everything and had been rising over this valley long before any of them and would be rising over it long after. "Okay," she said, for the third and last time. Roman's thumb moved across her knuckles, once. Dax reached out and covered their joined hands with his own, And there was something in the gesture that was not romantic and not territorial and not any single thing with a single name. It was just the three of them in the mountain dark choosing. The Glaciers went on to win the Calder Cup in June. Dax Mercer scored the series-winning goal in overtime of Game 7, on an assist from Roman Voss, who assisted on more goals that playoff run than any defenseman in league history. The celebration was enormous and chaotic and exactly what it should have been. Nora was on the ice in the aftermath, doing her job, checking players, managing the chaos, keeping everyone in one piece through the euphoria. And at some point in the middle of it, Roman found her through the noise and the spraying champagne and the 17 bodies celebrating in every direction, and he looked at her with something she had no clinical term for, something warm and vast and precisely aimed, and she looked back at him with the same thing. Dax appeared between them from nowhere, arm around each of their shoulders, soaking wet with something that might have been champagne, grinning with his entire face. "This is the greatest night of my life," he announced. "You say that every year," Roman said. "This year I mean it differently," Dax said, and he was looking at both of them when he said it, and the meaning was not subtle, and three of the teammates who witnessed the exchange spent the next several years periodically bringing it up and never quite being able to explain why they remembered it. Later, at the cabin, with the summer night spread over the valley and the moon settled above the ridge, Nora sat between them on the porch steps and listened to the forest doing what forests do after dark. The sounds of things that lived fully and without apology in the world they were given. She was, she thought, beginning to understand the appeal. She was also, she thought, beginning to hear things she hadn't heard before. Faint at the edge of range. The particular frequency of the world past midnight, past the human end of the dial. Not frightening, just new, just more. She closed her eyes and leaned back and let herself be between them, held by the warmth of them on either side. The steady, geological warmth of Roman on her left, the bright, kinetic warmth of Dax on her right, and she thought, this is what I have been working toward without knowing it. Not a destination, an expansion. Above the eastern ridge, the moon burned white and patient and entirely itself.